Hello, I'm Steve from Silver Beehive Studio, and today I'm going to do a demonstration on how to create textures in sheet wax that can be later used in lost wax casting. Let's go over some of the tools that you're going to need to work with sheet wax if you're going to be making textures in them. First thing is a cutting board. What they call these is self-healing cutting boards or whatever, and a rotary cutter. Super handy to be able to cut very cleanly and quickly. Scalpel or X-Acto knife, pair of scissors, nippers are handy. Probe or needle tool from ceramics are also really handy. Also, it's a couple of pieces of styrofoam, just scrap 1-inch styrofoam here, just handy for a lot of different reasons. And probably the workhorse of the whole process here, besides a rotary cutter, would be a mini crock pot. Now, I'm sure there's other ways to do this, but I found this have found this to be super useful, and I got this at a thrift store for $1. It's just a mini crock pot. I think they sell them. I don't know. I don't know what they're for, like party dips or something. And I literally think I paid $1 for it. And I drilled a hole in the lid of it and put a quick read thermometer in it, so I know exactly what the temperature of the water is. Which is a critical thing we'll deal with later on. This is connected to a rheostat that I use for multiple different things. Rheostat is a dimmer switch, actually, and the more you turn this on, the more power goes through it, and this is the way that I control the temperature of the water. And I kind of get the sweet spot and try and keep it there. So a rheostat to a plug, and something to make warm water with. Okay, next thing you're going to need is sheet wax. This is wax that comes in sheets, and it comes in different thicknesses, and most of it you can buy specialty wax that's from jewelry supply places, but it seems to be way more expensive than going on eBay and looking for often outdated base plate wax from the dental field. So a base plate has something to do with making dental appliances or something to do with dentistry. It comes in different thicknesses, and the thickness of the wax is critical. I've kind of learned that the hard way over the years. All these are different thicknesses. Some of these I just ordered recently. They come with a sheet of paper between them so they don't stick together. And this is kind of the raw material for making textures. I'll go over the thickness in just a moment. You can also buy wax that has textures already in it, but today we're going to be talking about making our own. So here's a couple-year collection of different earring designs that I've created, and almost every one of these is too heavy. So I was, I'm making just one of each of these, just working on design, working on the creative aspect of coming up with ideas for different earrings. But all of these here pretty much are just a little bit too heavy. You put them in your ears, and they just pull a little bit too much. And you're using more silver than you need to. And that was all pretty much an error on my part because I wasn't paying attention to the thickness of my wax. Now, of course, wax is really light. And when you're working with it as a wax, you're thinking, yeah, no big deal. But after you cast it and it's no longer wax, it's now sterling silver, it's a big weight difference. So you really want to pay attention to that. So the stuff that I made all that out of is about 1.3 millimeters thick, or approximately 17 gauge. And the stuff that really is, in my opinion, better is in the neighborhood of 22 gauge or 0.6 millimeters. So these are the two that I'm using now. It makes a much thinner piece. It's actually easier to make textures in, but the finished product is lighter. So you really don't waste your time, working with wax that's not the right thickness. Get the right thickness wax first, and then start playing around so that you'll end up with a product that you can really use later on. Now, I'll also mention too, when you're working with wax, you do not want to use wax that has frozen. It just really changes the properties of the wax. Here's some wax round wire. which is used for spruing things, or they're sold for spruing things, but I use these to make rings. You can use the exact same process I'm going to show you here with sheet to make a texture in round wax wire, which you could make bands, textured bands out of. But if you live in the northern climates like I do here in Maine, and you order wax in the winter, when it's 10, 20, 30 below zero, and UPS leaves it on your doorstep, that's a real problem. If wax freezes, it just changes the properties all around, and really makes it much harder to work with and more brittle. So don't let it freeze. Of course, the opposite would be true if I ordered this in the heat of the summer. If you live in a southern climate, you want to be cautious about having it sit on your doorstep when it's 90 or 100 degrees out. You're going to end up with a pool of wax, which actually had happened. I ordered some textured wax from Germany, and it came and it was fused into one big block because it got too hot. So you got to pay attention to the weather and shipping so that you don't get in trouble. So the next thing you want to do is you want to prepare your wax for the texturing process by cutting them into pieces. What size pieces you're going to want to cut them into totally depends on what you're making, what you're going to use the wax for. So I'm sticking with earrings for right now. That's what I'm kind of focusing on for right now. So I'm going to cut my sheets. I'm cutting 2 sheets at once using the rotary cutter. I'm going to cut that in half. And then I'm going to cut these into, just eyeballing them into strips. These are all going to get cut again. Next thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to accumulate or gather some things that have interesting textures. So interesting textures are things I'm trying to always keep my eyes open for wherever I am, whether it's a thrift shop or in a craft store or anywhere, kitchen supply stuff, or just out in nature. There's a infinite number of textures out there. You just need to kind of start collecting them. So here's an example of a hose that has an interesting kind of braided stainless texture on it that I could make a good impression out of for working with wax. Here's some trim pieces of fabric that have some really cool textures on them. Might be a good source for textures. Here's a stamp pad that I found in the store. I probably paid too much for it, but it's got some cool gear kind of patterns on here. So this is for ink stamping. This is from the clay world. You roll this on to make textures in clay. Let's see, these are, let's see, the gym teacher at school was getting rid of a whole bunch of old kickballs. Basketballs. All of these things have some really nice textures on them, and actually I've made a couple of textured rings that are quite popular with people that are from old rubber balls. These are actually sold as texture plates. I think they're sold more for drawing, where you place them underneath a paper and then with a crayon you do a rubbing over them, texture rubbing. But there's some great textures out there if you just go online and search texture plates. They're plastic. There's all different kinds. These are some very rigid ones. I usually use a lot of plastic in these. These are actually pretty darn expensive. But just keep your eyes open and you can find a lot of good stuff out there. Let's see, anything else here? Yeah, textures are everywhere. I actually made a whole video on using this stuff right here. This is a 2-part silicone mold making material here, and you mix these two together out in the field if you're out in nature, and then you have working time of a couple of minutes, and you can take the 2 parts when you mix them together. It makes this kind of putty that you push into a surface. Like this is probably tree bark, and I just kind of rolled a coil of this stuff up and pressed it on tree bark or rocks or any kind of texture you find out in the field, and you can come away with some really cool textures that you can use back in the studio. Oh, that's a hardware store is another good place. That's from a bolt that makes some cool textures. So I posted a video on how to use this material many years ago. I'll try and put a link to that in this video. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the process here. Basically, you're going to take this wax, you're going to put it in warm water and let it sit for just a minute or two until it softens up, and then you're going to take this soft wax, you're going to press it into onto some kind of texture, and that's how you're going to get your texture. I have learned over the years that the ideal water temperature to work with as a general utility wax softening temperature is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Why 122? I don't know. Why not 120, 125? I don't know. But 122 is what I have on here. And so that's generally my target. So with that rheostat over there, it's hit or miss. You know, I'm always kind of adjusting it up or down to try and get the ideal temperature on this rheostat here. But I'm always shooting for that 122. So I'm right in that neighborhood right now. If it's 115 or if it's 130, it still works just fine. The warmer it gets, you risk melting the wax too much. And if it's too low, it's just you have to work it. You have to press really hard, and you're not going to get quite as good of an impression. So that's what I start with. So when it's at 122, you can put a bunch in there. You don't have to worry about melting it. You can put a whole bunch. I'll put a dozen in there, and so they're just sitting there. They're not. It's not so hot that they're going to melt. They're just going to be soft, and they're just going to kind of be on standby for me to wait and work with them when I'm ready for them. So I'm just going to put a handful of these in here right now. Next thing I want to do here is I want to get the texture plates ready. I'm just going to use texture plates because they're easy to, for demonstration purposes. Some of these I've had a long time. Generally, when you're dealing with wax or making impressions like this, because the wax is wet, you don't have to worry about it sticking too much. But in the past, I have used silicone release spray for mold making. I've also used PAM. But PAM kind of leaves a residue. It's cooking oil, and I think that's probably what this is right here from an old one. Maybe that's something else, but that can leave a residue behind. Silicone, I don't know. It's probably not good for you to breathe, so just use caution whenever you're using any kind of aerosol in the studio. So looking at texture plates, each of these plates has kind of a convex side where it's bulging up and a concave side where it's going down in there. And you just need to be thinking about what is going to be most appealing on your wax texture. And remember, you need to think in reverse. So if I use the convex side and I peel the wax off of it, it's going to be concave on there. So a lot of times I'll actually use the concave side so that it's sticking out on the final piece, if that makes any sense. So let's go ahead and do one of these. So I'm just going to start with a basic kind of one. I'm just going to take a piece and I'm going to lay it on here, and I'm using the heel of my hand right here to press it down in there. Only takes 1 second or so to press it in. You have a working time of about just a couple seconds, because the minute you pull it out, it starts to cool down. So you got to work pretty quickly. And if you have cold hands, you want to warm your hands up first too. I've had problems with that before. So just pulling this out, setting it on here, pressing down with the palm of my hand, and you can see how that really molded too. My skin kind of pressed in around it, and let it cool down a little bit. Bend this a little bit, and it pulls right off. Particularly after it cools down a little bit. So really picked up on a lot of the textures there. And this is the convex side now, because it's I went into the back side of the mold and made a nice impression. Once you kind of get into the zone, your success rate will be pretty high, but you'll make a lot of mistakes at first. Don't throw any of those away. I'm amazed at how many times over the years I've had waxes that I thought were total rejects, but I found uses for them later on just in fabricating with wax. Here's a basketball. This basketball piece right here was in another part of the studio, which was much colder, and so this is pretty cold, and so that set up pretty quick, but I was still able to get a pretty good impression on that. Let's try, here's a kickball, rubber kickball. So objects like this, found objects, there is no front and back. The other side, there's no texture on. But and the orientation that you take the impression on is important too. Like I did this kind of crooked on there. Actually, I think what I want to do is I want to make it at a 45-degree angle for the next one. Let's try. I'm going to move this around. There we go. So again, trying to think about what you're going to be using these for and what kind of orientation you'd want to have on them. So this is pretty much the process now. I will put this on time lapse and let's see here. Okay, I'll just briefly touch on wax wire here. A lot of some of the texture bands that I make and sell, I make the textures this way, at least initially, using this impression with warm wax. And so I just cut some, let's see, 3mm round wire and have that soaking in here, warming up, softening up. The problem with that is to get, your basic, kind of the largest ring size, you're going to need at least 3-inch piece. And that's pretty, you got 3 inches here, but you got to use your entire palm on it. So that's where I will use a piece of styrofoam to kind of help spread the load out. And I haven't done this in quite a while. Let's see how this works here. So I'm working quick. Time is your enemy here. You want to go very quickly. As soon as you get it on there, you want to start pressing it. But you got to line it up right. There we go. Okay, that squished out pretty good. That's pretty good. So this is using wax wire. This is really good for rings. I may have actually pressed that a little bit too hard on there. So I'm going to try with my hand now, see if I can get a little bit more subtle. Yeah, I can feel with my hand how hard I'm pressing and ease up a bit. I think that's a little bit better. You want to look at the profile or feel the profile of the wax wire, how that's going to feel on your finger as a ring. And I think the first one is a little bit too flat. But this, like I said, this would be perfect for something else. It might be good for a different kind of design or an element of a ring or earrings or something. So that's working with wax wire. And of course, you can go with thinner gauge wire as well and make thinner rings. Try not to press as hard on this. I'm noticing here that when I'm peeling this off, I'm stretching the wax a little bit. So I think if I were to let it cool down for a couple of seconds first, I think that would help with that. Yep, just pops right off when you let it cool down. That's probably the best one. This is the standard learning curve. Every time you do this, you learn a little, or you remember things that you've already learned. So much more useful if you store these on a tray where you can really see all the different textures. So when you're looking for something in particular or just want to see what your best impressions are, you can just go and just grab the ones that work best for you. I really like the trays for that. So just a quick word about working with wax and bending it. So after you've textured it, if you want to make a ring, for example, you're going to want to wrap it around some kind of mandrel that's the size of the ring that you want. This is a size 9. For example, I just cut a whole bunch of dowels and then wrap tape around them to get different sizes. But I found that sometimes it can be brittle enough that it would break the design. So before I do this, I soak this in water just briefly, warm the wax up enough, and then wrap it around and cut my piece that way. You can cold bend this, no problem, but sometimes it is a problem. Sometimes it breaks. Here's a commercial set of these, but you can easily make your own ring mandrels using a dowel. And a lot of times I'll just be cutting using the rotary cutter. I'll just cut out the shapes that I want and work with them directly. But also pretty commonly I'll use a disc cutter to cut out circles or squares. The square disc cutter is really cool. And so that, that's just a handy way to get some cool shapes, textures, and then I'll keep them on a tray. After I punch those out, if I have extras, I'll keep them on the tray as well so I can see what I have when I'm fabricating. So here's a tree that's ready for casting, that's got some of these new textures on them with these thinner waxes. Feeling pretty good about it. Looking pretty sharp. Got some designs on here that I think are promising based on some older designs that I made. And yeah, life is good. And then I cast it. So this is that same tree after I cast it. Now I cast 4 flasks in all, and the other 3 flasks here came out perfectly. So I know it's not casting error, but more than half. On this tree right here, there are, let's see, 17 of those new waxes with a thinner wax. 9 of them were partial cast. 9 of them did not fully cast. So that's a serious problem, which I need to get to the bottom of. Let's take a closer look and see what we think. Okay, let's take a close look and see what we think is going on here as far as why these 9 new thin waxes did not cast. So first of all, if you look down in here, it's a long way. So I've got this new thin wax that's connected down here to the tree, the sprue way down here, and it's a long, thin, narrow section. So that molten metal has to travel through all of this thin surface area exposed to all that investment. It just has a lot of resistance with the texture. It has to flow through the texture to kind of get down here to the end, and the whole time it's cooling. So yeah, let's talk about solutions in a moment, but let's just see what happens. Same thing happened on the one behind it. It didn't make it down. These were circles on the end here, and it just didn't make it all the way through. It made it through everything else. Oh, not on this side. There's a notch out there. Let's see, this one behind that is a smooth piece of wax. There's no texture on it at all, and just lost that one corner there. Let's see, next side. Okay, this one's an interesting one here. Both of these actually. These are perforated, wax right here. So the metal came in right here through the gate and immediately hits this hole. So that's a barrier. It's like a post in the, like a tree trunk in the middle. So it has to move around. It has to go through around all these tree trunks before it gets down here to the end. So just a lot of surface area, really slowing things down. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. I think normally with thicker wax, it would be less of an issue. But you can see right here that resistance just slowed things down enough that it just cooled in time that it just couldn't complete it. I've got another one up here. This is also a very long design. I didn't quite make it up here. Let's see. Yeah, this one right here, this is interesting. So again, right out of the gate, it hits this obstruction, this hole, which is for the earrings where the ear wire was going to go, or a jump ring, and it has to go on either side, and it's super thin. So it just was enough, and it's also at the top of the tree or the bottom of the tree, how you're looking at it. So it the metal fills this part last, this end of the tree. So the metal drops all the way down to the bottom, fills these, and then slowly goes back up and fills these last. So these are also a little bit cooler. The metal's a little bit cooler. So anyway, just was not enough to fill that. And yeah, back to the beginning. So a couple of things I'm going through my mind here. So first of all, some of them are obvious with these obstructions here. I just need to add another gate or another sprue. So if I were to have a jumper that were to go from here to here, I think that probably would have taken care of it. So it would be getting metal from 2 different places on the model. And I think that would have been enough to increase the pressure to allow that to work. So I could add a gate to it. That's number one. And second of all, I could, in the design, let's see, what's an example of that one? Like this design right here. I've got this element right here, this piece of wire that comes down off of this. If I had extended that wire all the way back to the gate, to the sprue where it comes in, that would totally have done the trick. That would have provided a smooth, unobstructed flow of metal, maybe even on both sides to get down to the end, and I don't think that would have been an issue. So I could correct this with design, and let's see, some of the other ones, there's this one up here. Yeah, I probably just need to add another gate to it, just to connect another sprue to it farther down. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that, but basically you have to be thinking about that metal and what obstructions it's going to be hitting, what's in the way of it staying molten. And I didn't do that at all. I was just, I'd kind of gotten lazy or sloppy because with the thicker wax, it was less of an issue. And with this, it really accentuates those kinds of mistakes. So got to change the way I do things. Interesting, that same cast though, this is a tree of pumpkin seed stud earrings. and I've never done this before. I had done it once or twice, but never with an entire tree. But I put the stud on in wax. So all of these are really thin. This is 20 gauge wire, I believe, wax wire. And so the metal flowed in through the sprue, through the whole seed, and then I had enough heat to flow right out into that really thin wire for the stud earring. So, okay, so here we are with the original design. This is a design I made a couple years ago and liked it and decided to put it into production to make a rubber mold of it so that I could make lots of these earrings. So the thickness of this piece is 1.1 millimeters. Yeah, 1.1-ish thick. And the ones that I did last night that did not fully cast are only 0.7. So it's quite a bit thinner than the original one, and I think that was where, that's where the rub as far as where the problems were. So as I said earlier, you could add another gate, to kind of skip over all these perforations where the metal comes down and jump into this area here. But I don't want to make just a pair of these earrings. I want to make, a couple hundred of these. So I want it to be super simple. I don't want to have two gates. It's extra time, not only to do it, but also to clean it up, to cut those off and then clean up the place where, where it connected in the second place. So I'm going to think on this and try and figure out a way, maybe fewer holes. I could probably still get the same, I don't know. I like a lot of holes, but I could maybe space them out, or I don't know. I could do something with the holes. I could increase the area on the sides to make this a little bit larger, because this is solid metal here, so there's no obstructions. If I could get that flowing on either side, that might help things more. Maybe I could connect it at the top with a double sprue. Maybe like something like that. That would not be much more work to clean up, because it's on the outside. That would be easy to clean. So that's a solution for that. Okay, so kind of bringing it back now. Got off on a little tangent, but totally related. If you're making textures in wax, you need to be able to cast them. So you need to be thinking about that throughout the whole process. But these are the thicker, some textures of the thicker ones that this piece was made out of originally. The 1.1 millimeter thick wax. And actually, here's also some textures on wire. So these will become textured bands that I pressed in on round wire. So yeah, that's pretty much kind of a discussion on my process and troubleshooting when things don't go well, and how to fix things. And I am super interested if you have other techniques that I should be experimenting with or trying here. I'd love to hear your feedback on my process. I am 100% about learning how to do it and experimenting and failing. I'm not afraid to fail at all. So love to hear your feedback. Thanks. Hope you found this useful.